The reality is that KD usually puts his hip on somebody, extends his arm, asks for the ball, and you find yourself standing around watching him do his thing. Whereas Klay is a catch and shoot guy. So Steph gets to do his thing, whether it's off the dribble and pulling up, or it's off the dribble, penetrating into the seams of a defense and kicking it out to a guy like a Klay Thompson. They feed off of one another. And as a result of that, there is more movement required by the Toronto Raptors as a defensive unit to get up on everybody and pay attention. And if you recall in Game 2, when the Warriors were making that run, there was more than a few backdoor cuts that the Golden State Warriors scored layups on. Why? Because the movement was there. And you had to concern yourself with Steph and Klay that you lost a Draymond, you lost a guy like Cousins or somebody else along the way. Those are the kind of things that you have to worry about with Klay and Steph on the floor. It's not because KD is not better than Klay. He clearly is one of the best, I think the best in the world. And he's formidable, but I don't anticipate he'll be 100%. I think if KD comes back, he'll be at about 70, 75%, which is more than good enough. The difference is, even though that makes the Warriors more potent and more difficult and just as difficult to deal with, it's a different kind of difficulty that it forces upon the Toronto Raptors, because with KD, it's just KD beating you because he's so great. With Klay and Steph on the floor, they're picking apart your defense because they're forcing them to move, they're getting them in foul trouble, they're discombobulating them defensively, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how I look at Klay.
You spent all that time to try to say you'd rather have Klay Thompson than Kevin Durant.
Yeah.
Let me say something. When Bobby Knight was asked by Stu Inman, it's a story I tell on the air a lot, who was the GM of the Portland Trail Blazers, and they had the number 2 pick of the draft. Olajuwon was going 1 to Houston. Bobby Knight was asked, who should we take? Bobby Knight said, draft Michael Jordan. Stu Inman said, we have Clyde Drexler. We need a center. Bobby Knight said, draft Jordan, play him at center. In other words, whatever it is you think you need, if the question is basketball, the answer is Michael Jordan. Whatever it is you think you need, if the question is basketball, the answer is Kevin Durant in this case. It doesn't matter what you think you need, how it affects the team, the chemistry, Klay shooting, defense, blah, blah, blah. If the question is, you're trying to win a series, you're down 2-1, do you want to add Klay Thompson, an all-star, as you say, one of the 5 greatest shooters who ever lived, a two-way wing, a really great defender? Of course you'd like to have Klay. Or Kevin Durant, a practically perfect 7-foot basketball player and one of the best who ever did it all around? The answer has to be Kevin Durant. Let's not get too cute with it. If the Warriors get KD back, you said at 70% they win the series. I think I agree with you. Klay, they had him for 2 games. They were outplayed for 2 games, and we're lucky to come away 1-1. KD, you get him back at just most of what he is, you're going to be favored to win the whole thing, even down a game. Of course the answer is KD.
Well, you're misconstruing my argument because, first of all, I think either one of them, they win the series. So my point is, it's not like I think they'd win it with KD, but they won't win it without Klay. I'm on the record saying if they had Klay, they win. As a matter of fact, they had Klay. They'd have won last night. They'd have won last night if they had Klay. That's what I believe. And so when I'm looking at it, and I'm not saying for the series, I'm not saying overall, I'm saying for tomorrow night's Game 4. I think about Klay, and I'm thinking mild hamstring strain. I'm thinking about KD, and I thought Achilles. You thought Achilles. We hear calf tear. So I'm thinking the longer you buy him enough time where he can ultimately get back, the less you have to worry about him missing or going back down once he comes back. I'm not as worried about that with Klay as I am with KD, and that also factors into my decision.
Let's talk about the injury for a second. Sure. I agree with you about KD's injury. I'd be shocked if he plays in this series at all. That looked to me, and then Tim Hardaway mentioned torn calf. Said, you know, that I've heard that too. That makes sense because if that's not an Achilles, that's something that's more serious. Because the way he landed, and all of a sudden, as the broadcast they pointed it out at the time, he looked back like he got kicked in that area, which is exactly how people who tear their Achilles usually react. To me, that was something more than what they're reporting. Maybe I'm wrong. If I'm wrong and KD comes back,
we're wrong.
Right? Maybe
Both
right.
like that, yeah.
Sure. If we're wrong and others also think this, and KD comes back, that means obviously it wasn't a torn Achilles, or he wouldn't be.
Well, it
back,
wasn't because he's engaged in drills the last 2 days. They said, and he's going to do it again.
Whatever it is, if he gets back, he's good enough to play. I'll tell you the truth. In that case, Clay's injury maybe looked worse to me. The way Clay came down and was trying to move that leg, he was limping. Like, even when KD was kind of limping off, he didn't look like Clay did. Clay, just in terms of the way he looked and Clay's a tough guy. The way he looked when he was dragging himself off that court like on a pogo stick.
Yeah, but you got to also remember that when it comes to hamstrings, that's how folks usually look, particularly even if you have something as simple as a cramp. Remember when LeBron cramped in the NBA Finals and they had to carry him to the bench for crying out loud against San Antonio when the AC was jacked up, and I mean it was crazy, right? So you have that kind of stuff all the time. But I was doing the NBA special last night, and Wilbon and I were on the air, and Klay Thompson footage of him walking into the ring, had a smile on his face, was walking just fine. Okay. And the second they asked him to run up and down the hallway, it was a problem. And so you just don't know what's going to happen. You're right about that. My attitude is very, very simple. Again, because of what I said with Clay and Steph for one game at the Oracle, trying to buy time for KD. That's my attack.
I understand what you mean about the way a cramp can look. That wasn't a cramp. That's a pull. When you get a muscle pull in the hamstring or groin, that's the type of thing where he's not going to have enough time to let it fully recover, which means it's going to be an ongoing issue. In fact,
well, if it's going to be an ongoing issue, should he play tomorrow night?
I mean, I think he has to because they're down 2-1. You cannot go back to Toronto down 3-1.
But listen, he tapped himself out of game 2. He wasn't allowed to go in game 3. My point is,
brother, these guys are in trouble.
Yeah,
these guys are in injury trouble, and Looney didn't play. Yeah. They're in trouble.